Dale wiped the grease from his hands and looked up at the sky. It was not like the sky back home. The stars here were too many, too close, and the twin moons made everything glow a pale silver at night. He had been on this colony planet for 3 weeks now, and he still had not gotten used to it. He packed his tools slowly into his worn leather bag. The other workers had left hours ago. The facility was quiet now, just the low hum of the power grid and the distant sound of wind moving through the alien trees beyond the fence. Dale liked it this way. He had always been a man who preferred silence over noise, work over talk. He was 51 years old. His back hurt most mornings. His hands were rough and scarred from 30 years of repair work. He had fixed generators on oil rigs, patched cooling systems in deep-sea stations, and rewired entire power grids in places most men would not travel to. When the colony contract came up, he had taken it without much thought. The pay was good. He lived alone. There was no reason not to go. He slung his bag over his shoulder and started walking toward the workers' quarters on the far end of the facility. The path took him along the inner edge of the perimeter fence, a tall barrier of steel and energy wire that separated the facility from the open wilderness beyond. That was when he heard it. He stopped walking. It was a sound he could not place at first. Not mechanical. Not the wind. It was high and thin and broken, like something trying very hard to cry quietly and failing. He stood still and listened. The sound came again, from somewhere beyond the fence, close to the ground. Dale set his bag down and walked toward the fence. He pressed his face close to the wire and looked into the darkness beyond. The silver moonlight fell across a row of old storage sheds that sat just outside the facility boundary. They were not used anymore. He had been told they were left over from the early days of the colony, abandoned when the main facility was built. One of them was on fire. Not a big fire yet. Just a low orange glow crawling up one wall, smoke beginning to rise into the night air. But enough. And the sound was coming from inside it. Dale did not think. That was the truth of it. There was no long pause, no careful weighing of risk. He simply moved. He found the emergency access panel on the fence, punched in the override code he had memorized on his second day, and pushed through the gate the moment it clicked open. He ran across the dry ground toward the shed. The heat hit him before he reached the door. The fire had found something to feed on inside, and it was growing fast. Smoke poured under the door and through the gaps in the old wooden walls. He pulled his work shirt up over his nose, grabbed the door handle, and yanked it open. The heat pushed him back a step. He steadied himself and looked inside. In the far corner of the shed, half hidden behind a fallen metal shelf, was the hatchling. Dale had heard of Valens. Everyone on the colony had. They were the large dragon-like creatures that lived in the wilderness zones, rarely seen and mostly left alone. He had never expected to see one up close. He had certainly never expected to see one this small. It was no bigger than a large dog. Its scales were a deep blue-gray, catching the firelight and throwing it back in dim flickers. Its wings were folded tight against its body, too small yet to be of any use. It had wide, pale eyes that were wet with tears, and it was making that broken, quiet cry that he had heard from across the fence. One of its hind legs was caught under the fallen shelf. It could not move. The fire was moving along the wall to Dale's left, climbing fast toward the ceiling. A beam above the hatchling was already beginning to char black. Dale moved. He crossed the shed in a few strides, dropped to his knees beside the hatchling, and got his hands under the edge of the metal shelf. It was heavy. Old and rusted and loaded with years of stored equipment on top. He pushed. His arms shook. The heat pressed down on him from above like a second weight. He pushed harder. The shelf lifted. The hatchling pulled its leg free with a weak scramble and pressed itself against the wall, staring at Dale with those pale wet eyes. Dale let the shelf drop and reached toward the hatchling with both hands. He expected it to snap at him or pull away. It did neither. It leaned forward and let him take hold of it, its small body trembling against his chest. He turned and ran for the door. He almost made it. He was 2 steps from the opening when the burning beam above gave way. It came down without warning, and the section of roof behind it followed. Dale threw himself forward, trying to get through the door, but the edge of the collapse caught him across the back and the left shoulder and drove him hard into the ground just outside the threshold. The world went bright and then dark. He did not lose everything at once. He was aware, for a few seconds, of the ground under his cheek. Of the heat behind him. Of something small and warm pressed against his chest, still trembling. He had held on. Even falling, he had held on. He heard the hatchling make a small sound. Not the broken cry from before. Something quieter. Something that felt, even through the pain and the smoke and the ringing in his ears, almost like the sound a small child makes when it finally feels safe enough to stop being afraid. Dale tried to move. He could not. He closed his eyes. The last thing he felt before the darkness took him fully was the faint warmth of the hatchling against his ribs, and the strange, impossible sense that something vast and ancient was watching him from very far away, and that it had seen what he had done, and that it was not going to forget. Then there was nothing. The fire burned on behind him. The moons moved slowly across the alien sky. And in the silence beyond the fence, deep in the wilderness where the old things lived and breathed and remembered, something stirred that had not stirred in a very long time. The rescue team found him 12 minutes later, face down in the dirt outside the burning shed, burned and broken and barely breathing. The hatchling was gone. But on Dale's left forearm, just below the elbow, where there had been nothing but old scars and grease-stained skin that morning, there was now a mark. Faintly glowing. Shaped like something coiled and ancient. None of the rescue workers could explain it. None of them had ever seen anything like it before. Dale woke up slowly. The first thing he felt was pain. It was everywhere, but worst across his back and his left shoulder, where the roof had come down on him. His throat was dry and rough from the smoke. His eyes took a moment to focus on the white ceiling above him. He was in the medical bay. He could tell by the smell. Clean and sharp, with something faintly chemical underneath. The lights were low and steady. A soft machine beeped somewhere to his right, tracking his heartbeat with quiet patience. He tried to sit up. A firm hand pressed his shoulder back down. "Easy," said a voice. Dale turned his head. A young male nurse named Gary was standing beside the bed, checking a monitor screen with calm, practiced eyes. Gary was one of the few full humans working in the colony medical unit. He had a plain face and steady hands and spoke in the slow, careful way of someone who had delivered a lot of bad news and learned not to rush it. "How long?" Dale said. His voice came out as a rough scrape. "About 14 hours, Gary said. You have burns across your back and shoulder. 2 cracked ribs. Smoke damage to your lungs, but not as bad as it could have been. You are going to be sore for a long time, but you are going to be fine." Dale stared at the ceiling and let that settle. "The hatchling," he said. Gary paused just a half-second too long before answering. "Gone. When the rescue team reached you, there was nothing else there. They searched the area. Nothing." Dale closed his eyes. He remembered the warmth of it against his chest. The small sound it had made. He hoped it had gotten far enough into the wilderness to be safe. He lay still for a while and let Gary work. Dressings were checked. Fluid lines were adjusted. A scanner was passed over his chest and his back and his arms in slow, careful sweeps. That was when Gary stopped moving. Dale opened his eyes. Gary was standing very still, holding the scanner over Dale's left forearm. His face had changed. The calm professional look was gone. In its place was something quieter and harder to read. "What?" Dale said. Gary did not answer right away. He moved the scanner back over the same spot, slowly, as if checking that he was seeing it correctly. Then he set the scanner down and leaned in to look with his own eyes. Dale lifted his arm and looked too. The mark was on the inside of his forearm, just below the elbow. It was not large. About the size of a man's palm. It was a deep, dark blue at its center, fading outward through silver at the edges, and it glowed. Not brightly, not like a light. More like the last warmth of a coal that has nearly finished burning. It was shaped like something coiled around itself, with a long body and what looked like folded wings pressed flat along its sides. Dale had gone to sleep with nothing on that arm but old scars. "I need to get the doctor," Gary said quietly, and left the room before Dale could respond. The doctor was a woman named Harriet, small and precise, with short gray hair and the kind of steady calm that came from many years of seeing strange things and choosing not to panic about them. She came in, looked at the mark, scanned it 3 times with 2 different devices, and then stood very still for a long moment with her arms folded. "It is not a burn pattern," she said. "Burns do not look like this. The skin is not damaged. It is not raised. It is not ink. It is not anything the scanner can identify." "What does the scanner say it is?" Dale asked. "It says the tissue in that area is normal," Harriet said. "Healthy. No damage, no foreign material, no explanation. As far as the machine is concerned, there is nothing there." She paused. "And yet there clearly is." She took photographs. She ran more scans. She called 2 other staff members in to look. None of them could explain it. The mark sat on Dale's arm and glowed its faint, quiet glow and gave nothing away. By the time the alien authorities arrived, Dale had eaten a small meal, had his dressings changed, and was sitting up in bed feeling tired and sore and deeply confused. There were 3 of them. Tall, gray-skinned beings from the Colony Oversight Council, the kind who wore long formal coats and carried data tablets and spoke in very measured tones. They were accompanied by a 4th figure who was different from the others. Older. Smaller. Wrapped in a dark robe with a worn, weathered look that suggested great age. This one did not carry a tablet. This one just looked at Dale's arm. The 3 officials introduced themselves with names Dale immediately forgot. They explained that the medical team had filed an incident report and that the nature of the mark required immediate review under colony safety protocols. They spoke carefully and said very little. Then the older figure stepped forward. He looked at the mark for a long time without speaking. Then he looked at Dale's face. His own face was hard to read, but his eyes were not. His eyes were wide and bright and full of something that looked very much like shock held tightly under control. "Do you know what this is?" Dale asked him directly. The old figure was quiet for another moment. Then he spoke, in slow and careful English that had clearly been learned rather than grown up with. "It is a bond seal," he said. "Of the Valen kind." Dale waited. "It is a mark that passes from a Valen elder to one who is chosen," the old figure continued. "It is ancient. It is not given lightly. It cannot be placed by a young one, not even by accident. Something older than that hatchling placed this on you." He paused. "We do not know how. The elders of the Valen have not been seen in many generations. We believe them gone. I just pulled a small creature out of a fire," Dale said. "I did not ask for a mark. No one who receives one ever does," the old figure said quietly. One of the 3 officials cleared his throat and said that Dale would need to remain in the medical bay under observation. That the mark would need to be studied. That there were protocols to follow and reports to file and meetings to arrange. Dale nodded along and said very little. After they left, Gary came back in to check the monitors. The room was quiet again. The machines beeped their steady rhythm. Dale looked at his forearm. The mark glowed its low, patient glow in the dim light of the room. He was a repairman. He understood things that were broken and things that needed fixing. He understood tools and wire and burned-out components. He did not understand ancient marks that appeared on a man's arm in the night. But he had learned, in 51 years of practical living, that understanding something was not always required. Sometimes a thing simply was. And a man had to decide what to do next. He pulled the blanket up, closed his eyes, and went to sleep. The mark on his arm glowed on quietly in the dark, as if it had always been there, and had simply been waiting for the right moment to show itself. 3 days passed slowly. Dale spent most of that time in the medical bay, lying on his back and staring at the ceiling, which he had come to know very well. Every crack, every light panel, every small imperfection in the white surface above him. He had counted them more than once. His burns were healing. His ribs still ached when he breathed too deeply. His throat had mostly cleared from the smoke. Gary checked on him every few hours, quiet and steady as always, adjusting things and writing notes and answering Dale's questions in the careful way he had. The alien officials came back twice. They asked more questions. They scanned the mark again. They took more photographs and spoke to each other in low voices near the door. The old robed figure did not return, which Dale found he minded more than he expected. The officials asked their questions in the flat, formal way of people filling out a report. The old figure had asked nothing. He had simply looked, and somehow that had felt more honest. The mark on Dale's forearm had not changed. It glowed its faint blue-silver glow in the dark and faded to something almost invisible in the daylight, but it was always there. Dale had stopped staring at it after the second day. It was his arm. The mark was on it. Staring did not help. On the morning of the fourth day, Dale woke before the lights came up. He was not sure what had woken him. The room was quiet. The machines beeped. The low emergency lighting along the floor cast a pale strip of orange across the tiles. He lay still and listened. Then he felt it. A warmth near his left hand. Not the burning kind. The other kind. The same warmth he had felt in those last seconds outside the shed, when something small and trembling had pressed itself against his chest. He turned his head slowly. The hatchling was sitting on the bed beside his left arm. It was watching him with its pale wide eyes, perfectly still, as if it had been there for some time and was simply waiting for him to notice. Its blue-gray scales caught the faint orange light from the floor and held it softly. Its small wings were folded flat. Its injured leg, the one that had been caught under the shelf, was held slightly raised, and Dale could see that it was swollen and badly bruised but that the hatchling was bearing it without making a sound. Dale looked at it for a long moment. The hatchling looked back. "How did you get in here?" Dale said quietly. The hatchling did not answer, which was not surprising. It tilted its head very slightly to one side, the way a dog sometimes does when it hears a sound it is trying to understand. Dale reached his right hand out slowly, palm up, the way he had learned years ago was the right way to approach any creature that was not sure about you yet. He did not move fast. He did not reach toward the hatchling directly. He simply placed his hand on the bed between them and left it there. The hatchling looked at his hand. Then it stepped forward on 3 legs, carefully, and lowered its chin onto his palm. Dale stayed very still. What happened next was not something he could explain and did not try to. A warmth moved up his arm from his palm, slow and deep, and the mark on his forearm flared once, bright and clear, and then settled back to its usual faint glow. The hatchling let out a long, slow breath that fogged faintly in the cool air of the medical bay and closed its eyes. It fell asleep on his hand inside of a minute. Dale looked at the ceiling again and thought about practical things because that was what he did when situations moved beyond what he had words for. Gary found them 20 minutes later when he came in for the early check. He stopped in the doorway and stared for a long moment. Then he turned and went to make several urgent calls. The next hour was loud. Security staff came and stood in the doorway looking uncertain. Two colony officials arrived and spoke rapidly to each other and then to Gary and then into their communication devices. The hatchling did not move through any of it. It slept on Dale's hand with the deep, unconcerned sleep of something that had made a decision and was finished worrying about it. Dale told everyone who came near that they were welcome to do whatever they needed to do but that he would appreciate it if they kept their voices down. By mid-morning, the old robed figure had returned. He came in quietly, moved the officials aside with a gentle patience that somehow worked despite his small size, and stood at the foot of Dale's bed looking at the hatchling for a long time. Then he sat down in the chair beside the bed, folded his hands in his lap, and said, "I was hoping it would come back." "You knew it would," Dale said. "I hoped," the old figure said again, carefully. "There is a difference." A group of scholars arrived by early afternoon. 4 of them, carrying equipment and speaking quickly among themselves. They were different from the officials. Less formal, more focused, the kind of people who forgot to smooth their robes because they were too busy thinking. They scanned the hatchling from a respectful distance, careful not to disturb it, and spoke in low voices that Dale could not follow. After a while, one of them, a tall woman named June with tired eyes and ink-stained fingers, came and stood beside the bed. She looked at Dale in the direct, distracted way of someone who was still partly thinking about something else. "Do you know what this hatchling is?" she said. "Small," Dale said. "Hurt. Hungry, probably." June almost smiled. "It is the last surviving offspring of the Valeketh bloodline," she said. "The Valeketh were the oldest of the Valen lines. We believed them gone. Completely. For over 200 years. She paused. "This hatchling should not exist. And yet here it is." Dale looked down at the small creature sleeping on his hand. It looked the same as it had a moment ago. Small. Blue-gray. Breathing slowly. "Its leg needs looking at," he said. June blinked. "Yes. We will arrange." "And it needs to eat something," Dale said. "It has been out there for 3 days. I do not know what Valeketh hatchlings eat, but whatever it is, this one needs some." There was a brief silence in the room. The scholars looked at each other. The officials exchanged a glance. Gary, standing near the door, looked down at his notes to hide an expression that was not quite a smile but was close to one. The old robed figure said nothing. He simply watched Dale with those bright, steady eyes that saw more than they let on. Dale was not trying to make a point. He was not trying to be remarkable. He was a practical man looking at a small creature that was hurt and had not eaten and needed help, and he was saying the most obvious thing there was to say. But in that room full of people debating bloodlines and history and the impossible existence of one small hatchling, it was Dale's plain and simple question that cut through everything else and landed where it needed to land. June straightened up and turned to her colleagues. "Find out what Valeketh hatchlings eat," she said. "Quickly." The room began to move with quiet purpose. The hatchling slept on. The hearing was set for the 7th day. Dale had been told about it on the 5th day, by one of the colony officials who came in with a formal document and a careful expression and explained that the council required his presence at a review session regarding the bond seal and the Valeketh hatchling. The official used a lot of long words and spoke in the slow, measured way of someone reading from a prepared text. Dale listened, nodded, and asked what time he needed to be there. The official seemed slightly thrown by how little argument there was. On the 6th day, a woman came to visit him who was not an official and not a doctor and not a security worker. She was old. Not fragile old, but settled old, the kind of old that has stopped worrying about what it looks like and simply is what it is. She was short and broad-shouldered with white hair cut close to her head and dark, careful eyes that moved slowly and missed nothing. She carried a worn cloth bag over one shoulder and walked with a slight lean to the left that suggested an old injury long since made peace with. She introduced herself as Sarah. She did not show a badge or a title. She simply sat down in the chair beside Dale's bed, set her bag on the floor, and looked at the mark on his forearm for a long moment without speaking. The hatchling, which had refused to leave the medical bay and had been given a padded area in the corner with food and water and clean bedding, raised its head when Sarah entered. It watched her with its pale wide eyes. It did not make a sound, but its posture changed slightly, the way an animal's posture changes when it recognizes something old and trustworthy. "You know what it is," Dale said, meaning the mark. "Yes," Sarah said simply. "I have studied the Valen for 40 years. The bond seal is something I have read about many times. I never expected to see one in person." She paused. "May I look closely?" Dale held out his arm. Sarah leaned in and studied the mark for a long time without touching it. Her eyes moved over it slowly and carefully, the way a person reads something important and does not want to miss a single word. "It is complete," she said at last, sitting back. "Fully formed. That is not common even in the old records. Most bond seals described in the texts were partial. Incomplete. This one is whole." "What does it mean?" Dale said. "All of it. Not the official version. The real one." Sarah looked at him steadily. She seemed to appreciate the directness. "The bond seal links your life force to the hatchling," she said. "Not in a symbolic way. In a real way. What the hatchling feels in its body, you will sense at the edges of your own. If it is in pain, you will know. If it is afraid, you will feel a shadow of that fear. And the same is true in the other direction. The hatchling knows when you are hurt. It knows when you are near." She paused. "This is why it came back. It did not choose to come back in the way we choose things by thinking them through. It simply could not stay away. The bond pulled it home." Dale was quiet for a moment. "And it cannot be removed." "No," Sarah said. "Not by any method we know of. The old records are clear on this. The bond seal is not placed by will. It is recognized by something deeper than will. It cannot be undone any more than you can unstrike a match." She folded her hands in her lap. "I want you to understand this before tomorrow. The council will ask you questions and some of them will not be kind about it. You should know what you are carrying before you walk into that room." Dale looked at the mark. "What was the hatchling's mother?" he said. "The old figure, the robed one," he said. "The elders have not been seen in generations." "How did this happen?" Sarah was quiet for a moment. "We believe the mother was the last of the Valeketh elders. She had been hiding for a very long time. She came to the edge of the colony to leave the hatchling somewhere safe before she died." She paused. "She chose to leave it near humans. We do not know why, exactly. But the Valen are old and they watch and they learn over long periods of time. Perhaps she had been watching long enough to believe that a human heart would respond." Dale said nothing. He looked over at the hatchling in its corner. It was watching him with those pale eyes that were always either sleeping or watching, nothing in between. "One more thing," Sarah said quietly. "The mark did not come from the hatchling. A hatchling cannot place a bond seal. Something else placed it. Something that was present that night and has not shown itself." She paused. "Whatever it was, it chose you deliberately. That is not a small thing." Dale thought about the feeling he had remembered from the night of the fire. The vast and ancient sense of something watching from far away. He had told himself it was the smoke and the pain and the edge of unconsciousness playing tricks. He was less sure of that now. The hearing the next morning was held in a large grey room with a curved table at one end where 7 council representatives sat in formal coats. There were others in the room too, observers and scholars and officials, lining the walls. Dale sat in a single chair in the center of the floor, which he recognized as an arrangement designed to make a person feel small and outnumbered. It did not particularly work on Dale. The first three representatives spoke about protocol and precedent and the laws governing alien-bonded creatures within colony boundaries. They used careful language that was polite on the surface and firm underneath. One of them, a thin sharp-faced representative named in the documents as first adjudicator, leaned forward and said plainly that no human had the right to carry a Valen bond seal, that the bond represented a claim over a protected creature, and that the situation required immediate legal remedy. There was a pause after that. The room waited. Dale looked at the first adjudicator calmly. "I heard something crying in a fire," he said. "I went in and got it out. I did not ask for a mark. I did not ask for a bond or a hearing or any of this." He stopped for a moment, then continued in the same quiet, level voice. "It was small and it was alone and it was trapped and it was afraid. I could hear it from across the fence. I could not walk away from that. I do not think most people could." The room was very still. "I am not claiming anything," Dale said. "I am a repairman. I fix things that are broken. That night something needed help and I helped it. That is all I did." He stopped speaking. The stillness in the room stretched on for a long moment. The first adjudicator sat back slowly. Around the curved table, the other representatives were quiet, each one looking at Dale or at the table or at their own hands. Sarah was standing along the wall to Dale's left. He did not look at her. But he heard, in the silence, the faint sound of her exhaling slowly, the way a person breathes out when something they were hoping for has just happened. One by one, around the table, the representatives settled back into their chairs and said nothing more. The council's decision came the following morning. Dale was sitting up in his medical bay bed eating a plain breakfast and listening to the hatchling move around in its corner when Gary came in with a small printed document and set it on the blanket beside him without saying anything. Gary had a way of delivering news without making a performance of it, which Dale had come to appreciate greatly over the past week. Dale picked up the document and read it slowly. It was not long. The language was formal and careful in the way official documents always were, but the meaning underneath was plain enough. The council formally recognized the bond seal as legitimate and binding under colony law. The Valeketh hatchling was to be placed under the care and guardianship of Dale, with full support from the colony in terms of housing, resources, and medical access for both the hatchling and its guardian. The role was described in the document as one of honor and responsibility. There were several paragraphs about reporting requirements and quarterly reviews and the importance of the hatchling's well-being. Dale read it twice, folded it carefully, and set it on the bedside table. He looked over at the hatchling. It was sitting in the middle of its padded corner, looking back at him, its pale eyes steady and calm. Its injured leg had been treated 2 days ago by a quiet alien veterinary specialist named Roy who had approached the whole situation with remarkable composure and had wrapped the leg with a skill that Dale found genuinely impressive. The hatchling had allowed the treatment without protest, watching Roy's hands with those wide careful eyes and making no sound at all. The leg was healing well. Roy said it would be fully recovered within 2 weeks. "Looks like you are staying with me," Dale said to the hatchling. The hatchling blinked once, slowly. Dale nodded as if that settled it. Sarah came to visit that afternoon. She sat in her usual chair and told Dale that the name Valeketh translated, roughly and imperfectly, into something close to the word ember. The last warmth of a fire that has burned for a very long time. She said that in the old Valen tradition, hatchlings of the Valeketh line were given a short name on the 7th day, a name chosen by whoever stood as their guardian. Dale thought about it for less than a minute. "Keth," he said. Sarah was quiet for a moment. "That is part of the bloodline name itself." "I know," Dale said. "It should carry what it came from." Sarah looked at him for a moment with those dark careful eyes. Then she wrote the name down in her notes without further comment. That evening Dale asked Gary for a pen and some paper. Gary found both without asking why, which was another thing Dale appreciated about him. Dale sat for a while with the pen in his hand and the paper on the bed tray in front of him, thinking about what to say. Then he wrote. He wrote to his sister Nancy. She was 3 years younger than him and lived in a small house outside a quiet town and kept a garden and 2 dogs and called him every few weeks to make sure he had not gotten himself killed somewhere. She worried about him in a steady, practical way that was not dramatic but was always there, like a low hum under everything. He told her he was fine. He told her about the burns, briefly and without making much of them, because she would hear it in his voice if he hid it completely and it was better to say it plainly. He told her the work contract had changed shape somewhat and that he would be staying on the colony longer than originally planned. He told her that something had come up that needed looking after and that he was the one who needed to look after it. He paused for a while at that point, pen resting on the paper. Then he wrote that she should not worry. That he was where he was supposed to be. That sometimes a thing found you rather than the other way around and the only sensible response was to show up for it. He signed it the way he always signed letters to her, just his name, no flourishes. He folded it and gave it to Gary to send through the colony mail system. 2 days later Dale was discharged from the medical bay. He was given a housing unit on the quieter edge of the colony, a low building with a wide open area attached that the colony staff had already modified with a larger door and an outdoor space enclosed by a low fence. Practical and plain and exactly what was needed. Keth walked out of the medical bay beside him, 3-legged still but moving with increasing confidence, staying close to Dale's left side where the mark was. Not pressed against him. Just close. The way a person walks beside someone they trust without needing to hold their hand. The colony staff they passed stopped and watched. Some of them had heard the story. All of them had heard something. Dale walked at his usual pace and did not perform anything for anyone and Keth matched him step for step and that was that. The first week in the new housing was quiet and full of small practical work. Dale had always settled into a new place by fixing things. There was always something that needed fixing. A stiff door hinge. A light panel that flickered. A water connector that dripped at the joint. He moved through the small task steadily and Keth followed him from room to room, watching his hands with the focused attention of a creature that was interested in how things worked. On the 8th morning Dale took his tool bag outside to the open area and sat down on a low bench to repair a solar collection panel that one of the colony technicians had dropped off, apologetically, saying it had stopped functioning and no one had been able to sort it out. Dale looked it over for a few minutes, found the problem, which was a corroded connector that someone had missed because it was seated behind 2 other components, and set to work. Keth came outside and lay down beside the bench. Not on Dale's feet, not pressed against his legs. Just beside him, in the pale warmth of the alien morning sun, with its chin resting on its front paws and its pale eyes half closed. Its scales caught the light the same way they had caught the firelight on the night Dale had first seen them. That deep blue-gray that shifted and changed depending on the angle. The twin moons were still faintly visible on the horizon, not yet fully faded with the morning. The sky above was a color that had no exact name in English, somewhere between green and gold, with high thin clouds moving slowly across it. Dale worked steadily. His hands knew what they were doing and did not need much direction. The corroded connector came free, was cleaned, was reseated properly. The panel was reassembled piece by piece with the quiet efficiency of someone who had done this kind of work for 30 years and still found it satisfying. He had not asked to be here. He had not planned any of it. He had gone to a distant planet to fix a power grid and come back with burned ribs and a glowing mark on his arm and a dragon sleeping beside his workbench. He did not find this funny exactly. But he did not find it unwelcome either. The mark on his forearm caught the morning light as he worked, glowing its faint and steady glow. Keth's breathing was slow and even beside him. Somewhere across the colony a bell rang the morning hour. A bird-like creature in the trees beyond the fence made a long calling sound that echoed and faded. Dale tightened the last connector, tested the panel's output reading, and set it aside. He reached into his bag for the next task. Keth opened one pale eye, checked that Dale was still there, and closed it again. That was enough. For both of them, in that quiet alien morning, it was exactly enough.